Presidential candidate Mitt Romney's opposition to the auto bailout may hurt him in Michigan, but it may do other things too. We got Joe White of the Wall Street Journal joining us now from the Midwest, where he's going to explain the complexity of the situation here, because it's not cut and dry, is it?
No, it's not at all. Hi, Simon. No, it's not. It's not cut and dried at all. Especially with the polls showing that Mitt Romney has a fight on his hands with Rick Santorum in his home state here in Michigan, which I think 3 weeks ago you would not have expected at all. So the Romney campaign has decided to launch its barrage, or a barrage, today with an op-ed piece in the Detroit News, basically tangling with the UAW, criticizing the auto bailout, and then with a television ad that's starting to air in Michigan markets, playing up Romney's roots here in the state.
And what is Santorum and his other opponents doing to capitalize on this?
Well, I think a lot of it is just sort of letting Mr. Romney be Mr. Romney, and with all the baggage that entails. I mean, Rick Santorum has gained ground, according to a couple of polls that we've seen recently, with conservatives in the state. There are a lot of very conservative people in Michigan, particularly on the western side of the state, far from the auto centers around Detroit. Mr. Santorum is strong with evangelicals, no surprise there that there's a lot of them in Michigan. And there seems to, the same issue that has dogged the Romney campaign everywhere else in the country seems to be dogging him here, which is that there's just not this enthusiasm for Mitt Romney that the Romney campaign would like. So he's trying to gear that up. He's doing it in this interesting way, though, which is tangling with the UAW in a state, probably the one state in the union where unions actually matter.
Yeah, and that is the one union of all the unions there that you don't want to tangle with. I used to work for GM. They have a very powerful union. Does that seem to be a bit of a misguided venture for him to do that? I mean, it seems that, not something I necessarily agree with, but he's basically saying, hey, the bailouts were bad. I tend to agree with that, but I can't imagine anyone who kept their job through the crisis with one of the auto companies feels that way.
Well, I think it's absolutely a risk that instead of responding to this criticism of bailout, people, that in the way that Mitt Romney would like them to, which is to say, darn right, the federal government has no business saving auto companies. That instead they might say, well, wait a minute, what else? What was the other option? Let it go bust and collapse? Gosh, that doesn't sound like such a great idea. I mean, the problem for Mitt Romney
actually,
go ahead.
Let me interrupt you there. Is he capitalizing on the fact that General Motors and Chrysler were both basically said, if we don't get a bailout, we might have to go to Chapter 11 and restructuring, and that will be the end of the earth. They got the bailout and then immediately went to Chapter 11 and restructuring, and the world didn't end. That would be my counter if I was in his shoes.
Well, right, but that's not the argument that he's making. Actually, that is a good argument, but that's not the argument that he's really making.
Maybe I could sell it to him for a few pennies. Do carry on, Joe.
The problem is that people he seems to be making an argument that could have been done without government money, and there are a lot of people who would say, at that time, in the middle of a financial panic, there was no private capital to orchestrate the restructurings, and you would have had a chaotic collapse. It's really hard to argue about history, especially complicated history of this sort. And it's not entirely clear to me that that's the place where the Romney campaign really wants to argue, but we'll have to see.
And interesting. From what you know now, and I hope I didn't interrupt you, but from what you know now, and you're in Detroit, and from what you're hearing, is the strategy going to work? Do you think he'll manage to wear down the population in Michigan, and they'll suddenly say, oh yeah, Mitt Romney, he's the man?
Well, you know what? I think it's going to depend a lot on who votes. If it's the Republican establishment and basically the sort of the Chamber of Commerce, Mitt Romney should do just fine. But if Rick Santorum can energize and get to the polls the conservatives and the Tea Party people and the people who just don't like Mitt Romney for whatever reason, and who maybe don't like what he's saying about the UAW, but they don't like President Obama, it could be a lot closer than the Romney campaign would probably like it to be. Because think about it, this is his home state. It should have been a walk. It's not a walk anymore, and that I think in and of itself is a setback for the Romney campaign.
Well, that was basically what I wanted to know is, you call this a very unusual strategy, and I wanted to know whether you thought it was a good one, a good way to go, and how is it going to turn out?
I have to say that, and again, if I knew, I'd be in great shape. I have to say that I think it's a little funny to be picking a fight with the UAW in a state with an open primary. The UAW, if it wanted to, could limber up its get out the vote machine on February 28th, and just for fun send union members in to vote for somebody other than Mr. Romney, and which they did in 2000 in order to give the state to John McCain, and embarrass the then governor, Republican governor John Engler, who was backing the man who would become President George W. Bush. I mean, the politics here are wonderfully complex, and today certainly has demonstrated that.